There's always positives and negatives for any situation you run into. Take for example the state of this YouTube channel. Yes, the content hasn't been as frequent as it was a year ago, mostly due to not being able to do this full time. But on the flip side, I have reasonable income now, and that means I can pick up shiny new things. One might say that my gaming budget has had a switch flipped. I bought a Switch. So of course, I have to actually use it for content on this channel to justify the purchase to myself. So what game to begin with? Sure, I could try Zelda, but you'd be waiting several more weeks and/or months to get my normal review content with my extreme detail. I could do Puyo Puyo Tetris, which is pretty much what you'd expect out of the game, a good multiplayer puzzle game. But no, I know exactly what game I wanted to review for my first Switch review, because it was a remake of a game that I loved as a kid. Blaster Master Zero for the Nintendo 3DS and the Nintendo Switch, released to both systems on March 3rd, 2017, and can be gotten for a base price of $9.99. It's a light Metroidvania, which switches between more action platforming in your trusty land vehicle and top-down shooting sections where you have to leave the safety of your tank. Now you may be asking yourself, why review this game 6 months after it came out? Well, here's the thing. Not only did I just get a Switch recently, but there's been recent updates to the game that have made me take notice, like being able to play as Shantae, the voluptuous genie from her own series. And Shovel Knight just released last Friday, along with a new difficulty mode about a month ago. But here's the question. Can Blaster Master Zero capture the feelings of nostalgia that I had playing the game in front of a CRT TV as a kid? Or has the experience degraded over time, unable to capture those times of long past? That's what I'm here to find out in this review. Let's start with the story. You play as Jason, a lone human, looking for his friend Fred against a sea of hostile mutants. Luckily, you've got a nice shiny vehicle to fight them in Sophia, and you'll have to make your way through the depths of the planet, ranging from residential areas to underwater caverns. Getting to your friend won't be easy, and considering that Jason apparently doesn't have anyone else in his life, this becomes a desperate struggle to find Fred. Along the way, you'll run into a mysterious survivor named Eve, who doesn't know what she's doing there. Of course, amnesia is involved. She gives you a partner to take on this ever-growing mutant menace, and gives you a little more reason to actually wipe them from the face of the planet and not just ignore them, as she reveals in time a little more about the backstory of where these mutants came from. And that's it. The game keeps with the theme of the NES title, light on story, and focuses more on the actual gameplay in question. Although there are some cutscenes that occur, you really only get light information about Eve, about Jason, and what their mission is in the end. While the story does stay true to its original NES roots, I'm gonna be honest here, it sorta sucks. I wouldn't have minded if it took a page from games like Shantae and added just a tiny bit to be more modern in terms of its storytelling. Yes, it feels like an NES classic, but you can update it a little more to the modern day. Take for example things like the codec-like functionality where you can talk to Eve outside a battle. It doesn't really do what I would hope it would do. It just explains how to use weapons and upgrades that you got, at least the times I tried it. Inserting some story segments here would have been perfect, or at least some banter between Eve and Jason. Instead, I just found myself disappointed in this little interactions because guess what? It didn't show off the personalities of Jason or Eve. Now, I will say at least the game does give you a reasonable conclusion if you find all the items and weapons, at least in terms of adding to the game's universe and giving you a satisfying ending. It's at least something to work toward if you pick up the game, and you'll want to do that anyway, as I'll reveal in a later section. With not a lot of story to talk about, it really shouldn't be surprising to you to learn that the game relies on its gameplay to be worthy of your time. The gameplay here can be separated into two major sections, inside Sophia and outside Sophia. I'll start with being in Sophia first. In Sophia, you start with a blaster type weapon and can jump simply over a variety of hazards and enemies. It's simple NES platforming action here, as each enemy has one movement pattern and a way to hurt you, whether it's swiftly slithering along the ground, attempting to touch you and expose you to damage, or to basic bullet patterns that don't ever really get that complicated. However, very quickly you'll end up getting several upgrades that allow you to boost into the air, extending your shot, as well as using mortars via an energy meter. You can blow through energy quickly in this game, especially with the jetpack-like functionality that I just mentioned, so normally you'd have to be careful of how you'd use it, bringing it out only when you would really need it. I say normally, however, because you'll find that enemies drop health and energy like candy during Halloween. As for the combat and gameplay, there are elements here that I really do enjoy. In particular, the limitations they put on the basic combat. Normally, Sophia can fire at the 0, 45, and 90 degree marks, and having to get into the right position can be a tricky yet fun experience with certain combinations of enemies. Sure, you've got some special weapons like homing missiles that can make certain enemies easier, but when the game is asking for precise skill and precision, the game lives up to what I remember in the classic NES days. In addition, when the level design is really trying to change things up and force you to learn new mechanics, it really works. When you get the mortar, for example, you're wanting to fire it all over the place due to its relative power. But then the game puts you in locations where you have to be selective in how you use it, because if you just let it go at any point, you end up doing damage to yourself repeatedly. In terms of the Sophia gameplay, however, I'd say the game lives up to its potential around half the time. The thing is, when the game is being that creative with level design, or really taking advantage of needing to use Sophia's secondary weaponry, it shines. But something felt off while I'm playing. Was this really the game that I played as a kid? Granted, it's not on a CRT TV, and I'm not in my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles PJs, just my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles boxer. I gave away way too much information there. I mean, it is a remake, and elements of the level design and enemies feel pretty close to what I remember from the original, as I mentioned before, which at first glance looks like an interesting variety as you play through the game. There's sections where you have to think a little about how you need to use your skills to get through the section, like how you have to use your wall climb to get around these spotlights. So the formula seems pretty similar, and yet here I sat disappointed in what I was playing. I remember this game being the bee's knees as a kid. Sure, there were new upgrades that made the game easier, things like save points, for example. So, had I just grown up? Am I just better at video games now? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. See, the game remastered everything, with new pixel art styles and more modern conveniences like bindable controller buttons. However, there was one thing that got remastered that maybe shouldn't have: the controls. For the sake of this review, I went back and played the original Blaster Master, just to see how different it was this time around. And one of the things I noticed almost immediately was how tighter Sophia handled in the newer version. Which would sound like a good thing, right? That you have more control over the gameplay you've got. Surely I wouldn't hold that against the game. Because the controller's against the screen. Because the controller's against the game. I'm holding it against the game. Jokes. Those who have followed the channel may know what I'm working towards here. That I always say that the controls should match the gameplay in question. And sadly, the improvements to the vehicle controls don't actually help this game at all. Quite the contrary. Sections that you needed to be slow and steady now could easily be conquered without slowing down. Precision platforming wasn't an issue here, and that means certain challenges from before, well, they weren't challenges anymore. This led to a real inconsistency in the gameplay because the difficulty curve was so all over the place, but usually the game was rather easy. The tight controls meant that you could get more damage on bosses, and while it may have been a problem before, it definitely wasn't now because you may be able to defeat the boss before it even is able to do anything. In fact, there's only one thing that really gave me a real hard time in the game when it comes down to it, and that's when you had to get out of your vehicle and go on foot as Jason and had to do the platforming. Now there's one boss where you gotta climb up these platforms, and it can be tricky, especially with some of the looseness of these controls, but hey, I'm actually fine with that. But no, the most times I died was this jump. The combination of the physics and precision you need to make this jump, yeah, it sucked. I died maybe 40 times trying to make it, and look, maybe this jump was in the original game and I just don't remember it. I mean, I'm 30 years old, that was a long time ago, but I don't remember it, and it really irritated me. Now, people would have complained if it was in the original game and not here, but frankly, sometimes elements of a game's past should be forgotten, and for my own sanity, I wish this particular jump was one of them. But once again, there's an oddity here. Despite the low difficulty with insane sections just as I mentioned, and the overall inconsistency in the gameplay, I still enjoyed myself for the most part in the vehicle sections. Maybe it's nostalgia overriding certain parts here, but even though I knew the combat could be a lot better or designed a lot more sharply, I still had a good time. I think when it comes down to it, its inconsistency in the Sophia sections saved it from itself. Yes, there were sections that were a lot worse than others, but those sections didn't have one period long enough where it killed the overall flow of the game. Instead, another section would come out and save it for a bit before dropping back down in terms of the game's quality. This cosine-like wave of gameplay was annoying for sure, but it ended up saving the game from me putting it down, never to look at it again. Let's change gears a tiny bit though, because there's one other side to the gameplay here, the top-down shooting. Sophia can't go everywhere, and so Jason will have to get out of Sophia and go into various caves, hiding necessary upgrades for both you and Sophia herself. Now this may look like your typical top-down shooter, but it is a bit different than most of them out there in the way the weapons work here. You start with a pitiful blaster that only extends a small range across the screen. However, while fighting, you will find these power-ups, and picking them up will upgrade your gun. Now this isn't your typical upgrade progression, as the gun can pick up reasonable new qualities here, like chain lightning with a small rate of fire, but stronger power, or even a flamethrower of all things. The catch here with this upgrade system though is simple. If you take damage, your gun will be downgraded. And considering how several enemies in this mode work, you'll find that you may lose several upgrades in quick succession. Well, you would if it wasn't for one thing. The wave gun, the most powerful upgrade in your arsenal. That upgrade literally tears enemies apart, to the point where many of them aren't even a challenge, even the bosses. It can go through walls, it can hit an enemy multiple times, and it has unlimited range. In short, this weapon is like having the Farsight XR20 in your hands, and you only have to worry about any enemy in close vicinity. If you don't know what a Farsight XR20 is, brush up on your N64 shooters. The difficulty curve here drops a cliff. Things become way too easy once you get the wave gun, and it's pretty easy to hold onto it. In fact, there is one upgrade that you find in a cave that protects your weapon's upgrade for a period of time when you're first hit, and you just have to avoid being hit a second time in a small time. Which sucks, because when the game takes that weapon away from you, things get significantly better in terms of difficulty and enjoyment, because a lot of these other weapons have cool special properties. Things like the flamethrower in the ice section of the game, actually able to burn through the ground, making it easier to walk on and move through these caves. When you have to be more precise with your weapons here, when you've got to take your time, you'll find a game that's actually a great combination of strategy and skill. This is evident in the final set of levels, where you have boss after boss after boss with little recovery time. The game starts really pushing you, considering you'll probably lose the wave weapon with the certain boss combinations, and then you feel the rush of adrenaline trying to survive at that point. I just wish the game in these sections was like this most of the time. I will say this, however, it's a pain to switch weapons in this game. You can only cycle through it one way, and while that is consistent with the original version of the game, this is one of those things that, yes, I think an upgrade in this section would have made a lot of sense here. While that upgrade would have been wanted, this other upgrade I don't necessarily want, even though it makes more sense considering the presentation of this game. Here's the thing, let's look at the original Blaster Master top-down section. Let's look at Jason firing here. Notice something. Notice where his bullet comes out. It's not entirely center. It's on par with the gun model, of course, but it means when you're lining up the shot on the boss, you need to take that into account. That off-center firing is not present in the remake, but from what I see, the gameplay is still relatively the same level design-wise, which again means that things are a bit easier. Now you may say, wait, at a certain point, when you get used to the off-center firing and it become a wash? Well, I'd say so in the more open sections of the top-down shooting, yes. But there's plenty of sections where you have bridges and more precise areas of firing. And in these sections, there's more room to maneuver due to the firing being in the center, especially when you need to dodge bullets. One other thing I want to mention is the extras in terms of the extra characters coming out. Now, Shantae is already out at the time of this review, and it's not just a palette swap here. Here's the thing, in the top-down sections, Shantae can use her hair in more of a melee attack and only has a couple of spells. The thing is, this game becomes a bit more difficult because of that, and it becomes a bit more enjoyable too. Shovel Knight's much the same way, although he's got the ability to reflect bullets with his shovel, and his ranged attacks need to be a bit more precise. This isn't just cosmetic DLC here, it affects the gameplay in reasonable ways, and from my perspective, it makes it better. There's one other complaint that I have about this game, and that's the fact that the harder difficulty mode that came through an update is locked behind a full playthrough of the game. Specifically, a full playthrough getting all the items and getting the true ending. The thing is, I started to play that version of the game after I fully beat the game, and honestly, I question why not allow the player to have that in the first place. Enemies take a lot more bullets in this mode, and here's the thing, that takes care of a lot of the difficulty problems I had with the game. Now you had to be careful. Enemies would get several cycles of attacks off, and you had to actually reasonably dodge and fight your opponents. It worked so much better in my mind. Granted though, I had a lot of experience from playing it from way back when, so I wouldn't want to put that experience on everyone. But for me, why make a veteran of the game, one who probably picked up the game knowing what he's doing, play through the game to get that challenge? Sometimes that can work to extend a game's life, of course, but I don't think this was the right way to do it here. So overall, the gameplay is very hit and miss, but when it hits, it really brings back the nostalgia of the NES platformer, the NES action platformer to be specific. When the game gives you a challenge, you will enjoy it. It's just that challenge that may be hard to replicate over a period of time. As to the technical elements of this game, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here like I do with most PC ports or PS4 games. The thing is, the game runs at 60 FPS with no hiccups in either docked nor in undocked mode. I mean, the game isn't exactly a world beater when it comes to the gameplay nor the graphics that it's trying to present, but it's nice to see that it has a 60 FPS frame rate. As to options, lo and behold, the game has bindable buttons. That's actually surprising to me, mostly because I almost expected it to be overlooked on the Switch platform, but it's here, and I thank the developers for including it. In addition, it has this option right here, confirm and cancel. Now, you may think, well, wait a minute, that's just the standard in games. But here's the thing, Japanese games actually have B as this sort of confirmation prompt, as opposed to most American games, which uses A. So if you're going back and forth between a Japanese game and an English game, you could end up hitting the confirmation button and end up actually backing out because no, that wasn't the confirmation button. So I like the fact that they included this option here. Thank you for that. Now, the game doesn't have graphics options, but honestly, I don't expect it for a console game. What I do expect is audio sliders. Yes, maybe I want to adjust the music so that it's a little lower than the actual voices that are coming on the screen, or maybe that I want the ambient sound to be a little higher. I wish this was a standard, and it looks like it's something that a Nick Creates just overlooked here. This may be shorter than most technical sections, but here's the thing. I usually talk about technical portions and point out the problems. Here, there isn't a lot. The thing is, it's not doing a whole hell of a lot in terms of new graphics, in terms of really putting the device to the test, but for the game itself, it runs perfectly fine. And that's all you really need to know about the technical section in the end. Finally, I'm going to briefly talk about the presentation. This is an old school NES style at its core, down to the game's uses of color and its pixel art style. Now, even though the game is a remake, and they could have overhauled the style to be more on the level of, let's say, Azure Striker Gunvolt, I don't think that would have captured the nostalgia factor of the game. And let's be clear, your colorful pink Sophia driving off at the start of the game, yeah, that brought back the nostalgia, at least for me. The presentation is clear on what it's trying to show at all times, and I was honestly surprised with some of the detail here, especially in the top-down sections of the game. I mean, just look at this boss model. That's pretty cool for the art style in question. What I also want to point out here is that in either case, whether it be the top-down section or the Sophia sections, it's very easy to see where your character and enemies are at all times, even when you've got several layers of the same base color with different hues. The small black outline does enough to give details to all the models in question, but doesn't go overboard. It makes for a visual style that's very easy to follow with the eyes, without putting strain on it. Now, the brief sections of cutscenes of the game give a good NES anime crossover style that I love the line work on, but it's so infrequent. I wanted more like this scene with the story sections, so it ended up being more of a tease more than anything else, because I wanted more story, and thus I wanted more artwork, and I just wanted more. As for sound, remember in the technical section I wanted audio sliders? Well, here's where they would have come into play. There are good sound indicators that give great feedback on what you're hitting in both gameplay sections, with Sophia and without. It seems to fit the enemies that you're hitting or the weapons you're firing too. The problem is that the audio for them seems to be on par or softer at times than the music, making it hard to hear, so you don't get the full benefit from it. Overall, the sound actually isn't that big of the experience, and while yes, you will get reminded of some classic NES tones, it really just doesn't compare to other games in the genre, like the Mega Man series. Take a listen though, to see what I'm talking about. Music-wise, if you're a fan of the original series, you should be happy here, and even if you're not, you're still gonna be happy. The forest overworld theme, in my opinion, is one of the most classic pieces in the NES music library, and the classics have been brought back to really hit you in the face with nostalgia. They fit the action themes the game is going for, while still keeping a beat that's fun to listen to even if you're not playing the game. It's the strongest element of the presentation by far, in my opinion. And well, just take a listen and let it speak for itself. The best way I can describe this game's presentation overall is appropriate. It is a remake. It could have been better in certain areas, but it does capture the nostalgia, and that's what I think they were focusing on. Yes, there are improved models. Yes, there's improved sound, but overall, it all works to give you that nostalgic feeling if you've played the game before. If you haven't played the game before, well, you'll still enjoy the music here, and the pixel art style still does work because of the detail it can get out of certain models. It just won't blow you away. Which leads me to my conclusion, which isn't exactly easy. It's hard to know exactly what audience this game fits. Those remembering the first game may not enjoy the remake at first because of the modern changes they put on the game. While yes, the original game seemingly had control issues, that control seemed to be designed around in terms of layout and enemies. It also doesn't have some of the flashiness of games of this era and what modern audiences are looking for in certain areas like story. Yet it's able to overcome those problems and still be a good, fun, solid game. What this game shows in my mind is the trickiness of remasters, a topic which I will be diving into over the next 2 months in a game design video. Change too much in that game, and those fans of the series will cry foul, and that you're hurting the series' reputation. Change too little, however, and you may not draw new fans in with a playstyle that was developed in a completely different time. Trying to find that middle ground between those two can be a nightmare in itself. I think a Nick Creates showed with certain enhancements, in particular with the DLC design, that they understood where the weaknesses of the game were, but didn't know how far to change the base gameplay to still get that nostalgic factor from the get-go. Nevertheless, it is still worth a play, just at the right price. And at $10 to $15 depending on when you pick up the game and the DLC, it really isn't bad. It's just not fantastic. Thus, the game scores a 75 out of 100, meaning primary fans of the genre can pick it up now, but for most people, it's going to be a target sales title. But as always, that doesn't take into account my enhancer system. Games are too specialized nowadays, and certain games will work for some people, but won't work for others. There's just too many tastes out there. So thus, I developed this enhancer system. If you strongly fall into any of these enhancers or dehancers, apply that score to the base score of this game. If the first digit of your score changes because of that, refer to the video listed here to find out where the game lies in terms of your buyability rating. Anyway, that's it for Blaster Master Zero. Coming up next on the channel, I'm not exactly sure which game I'm gonna hit first. Sonic Mania comes out soon and people wanted me to review that, and I am working through Hollow Knight in terms of a full review, and Pyre is also on the chart here. In addition, I have the game design videos that I mentioned from before, aka the trickiness of remasters, on top of the Overwatch hero ideas, as well as the Breath of the Wild guiding the player video. But I don't know exactly what I will hit next, but you will find out if you subscribe to this channel. But more importantly than that, I want your feedback on this video. What worked? What didn't? How can I become a better creator? List those comments in the comments section below. One last thing, if you are a fan of this channel and my sort of presentation style, I am writing more for TechRaptor nowadays. I've been covering the Alex Mauer saga, and over the next couple of weeks, you will see editorials by me that I'm working on in terms of YouTube, in terms of the Alex Mauer saga, and various other things. So go follow TechRaptor, bookmark it, put it on white on the ad list, so on and so forth. Those guys are good over there. Anyway, that's it for me, and as always, keep on gaming.